Step out of the vehicle slowly with your hands up.
Wait, hold on. I said I have to get to my son.
Don't resist.
Please, officers, I'm begging you, check my phone. My little boy is only 8 and he's really sick in the hospital.
This incident took place back in 2022 in Woodridge, Illinois, but the multiple body cam videos from that night have been replayed in courtrooms and living rooms alike, stirring up emotions that refuse to fade even years later. The footage is raw and unfiltered, showing exactly how a routine traffic stop for a minor violation turned into a nightmare for one hardworking father. It all started on a stormy evening when Jamal Thompson, a 58-year-old delivery driver, was behind the wheel of his company van, pushing the speed limit just a bit as he raced toward the local hospital. His mind was consumed with worry for his young son, who was fighting a life-threatening bout of pneumonia. The call from his wife had come an hour earlier, her voice breaking as she described the boy's labored breathing and the doctor's urgent warnings. Jamal had left his route immediately, the packages in the back forgotten in his desperation to be by his family's side. The minor violation was a broken taillight combined with going 15 miles over the limit on a quiet suburban road. But as the sirens wailed behind him and the lights flashed in his rearview mirror, Jamal pulled over with a sigh of frustration, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. "Just a ticket, I can explain," he muttered to himself, the rain hammering on the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. The air inside the van smelled of coffee from his thermos and the faint scent of cardboard boxes stacked high. He had been a delivery driver for over a decade, a job he took after retiring from the military to keep his family stable in Woodridge, a town where opportunities for veterans like him were scarce and the pressures of daily life weighed heavy. But what unfolded next was captured in chilling detail on the body cams of all 5 officers who arrived on scene within minutes. The videos show the group clearly, no lone cop in the frame, but a coordinated team of 5 visible from multiple angles as they exited their cruisers and approached the van with caution that quickly turned aggressive. The lead officer's camera, along with the others, recorded the rain splashing on their uniforms, the beams of flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Driver, turn off the engine and keep your hands on the steering wheel where I can see them," the command came loud and clear through the audio. Jamal complied immediately, his heart racing as he killed the engine, the sudden silence broken only by the pouring rain. He rolled down the window, water dripping in, and tried to explain. "Officer, I'm sorry for the speed, but my little boy is in the hospital. He's only 8 years old and he's really sick. I need to get there right away. Please, just let me go with a warning." His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen enough hardship in life, the desperation evident in every word. But the officers, influenced by biased stereotypes that often plagued interactions in neighborhoods like this, saw not a desperate father, but a potential match for a robbery suspect described earlier that evening. The description was vague: a black male, mid to late 50s, driving a van-like vehicle, and their preconceptions filled in the blanks without a second thought. The bodycam footage shows the escalation step by step. All 5 officers are in view as they surround the vehicle, hands on their belts, one shining a light directly into Jamal's face, blinding him momentarily. "Step out of the vehicle slowly with your hands up," barked the second officer, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Jamal's stomach dropped. He knew this wasn't going to be quick. As he unbuckled and pushed the door open, the cold rain hit him like a slap, soaking his delivery jacket instantly. The pavement was slick under his boots, the smell of wet earth and gasoline mixing with the fear rising in his throat. Before he could fully stand, 2 officers from the group grabbed him by the shoulders and arms, pulling him out with a force that sent him stumbling forward. "Wait, hold on. I said I have to get to my son," Jamal cried out, his voice rising in panic as they shoved him against the side of the van. The metal was icy cold against his cheek, the rain streaming down his face mixing with hot tears of frustration and fear. The other 3 officers stood close by, their body cams rolling and capturing the entire scene. You can see the group dynamic, the way they worked together to pin him in place. "Don't resist," one shouted, though Jamal was doing no such thing. They forced his arms behind his back, the handcuffs snapping on with a metallic click that echoed like a finality. The cuffs were too tight, biting into his skin, sending sharp pain up his arms as his shoulders strained. Jamal's mind flooded with images of his son in that sterile hospital room, machines beeping, his wife holding his small hand. "Please, officers, I'm begging you. Check my phone. There are texts from the hospital. My name is Jamal Thompson. I'm not a criminal. I served this country in the army for 20 years, and now I'm just trying to be a good father. This is all a huge mistake." His pleas were heartfelt, the raw emotion pouring out as the officers ignored him and began searching the van, throwing packages onto the wet ground with little care. The footage from one of the side body cams shows Jamal's face clearly, eyes wide with terror, mouth moving in desperate explanation, while the group of officers loomed over him. The internal thoughts raced through Jamal's head in those moments. How could this happen? He had always taught his children to respect the law, to believe in fairness, but here he was, a veteran reduced to a suspect because of how he looked. The anger bubbled beneath the fear, the sense of lost dignity hitting him hard. The rain continued to pour, drenching everyone, but it couldn't wash away the humiliation. Neighbors began to peek from windows, whispers starting, but the officers pressed on, one reading the Miranda rights in a monotone voice, while the others secured the scene. As they marched him to the squad car, Jamal's legs felt heavy, the cuffs chafing with every step. "My boy might not make it without me there." "Don't do this to my family," he whispered, his voice breaking. The door slammed shut, locking him in the back, the world outside blurring through the rain-streaked window. The officers conferred outside, their voices muffled but the body cams picking up snippets of doubt creeping in even then. But this was only the beginning of the ordeal. Those body cam recordings would later reveal the full truth of the mistaken identity, sparking an internal review and a civil lawsuit that forced the department to confront its biases. Officers would receive reprimands and mandatory retraining, but for Jamal Thompson, the trauma of that night would linger far longer, a scar on his soul that no apology could erase. What unexpected twists would the investigation bring to light, and how would the community react when the videos finally went public? The path to any kind of justice was just starting to unfold, and it would test everything Jamal believed in about the system that was supposed to protect him. Jamal Thompson had never been the type of man to seek attention or trouble. Born and raised in the south side of Chicago before moving to the quieter suburbs of Woodridge, Illinois, he carried the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much too young. At 18, he enlisted in the Army, serving 2 tours in Iraq as a logistics specialist, hauling supplies through dust, choked roads while rockets screamed overhead. Those years left him with a purple heart from shrapnel that still ached on rainy days like this one, and a deep, unspoken belief that if you did your duty and kept your head down, the world would eventually treat you right. After 20 years, he retired with an honorable discharge, returned home, married his high school sweetheart Denise, and started building the family life he had fought to protect. The delivery job came later, when the factory he worked at in Joliet closed down and left hundreds of veterans like him scrambling. Jamal took the wheel of that white company van because it paid the bills and let him be home most evenings to help his 8-year-old son Malik with homework or shoot hoops in the driveway. Malik was the light of his life, bright, curious, always asking questions about daddy's time in the service, always hugging him a little tighter when Jamal came home smelling of diesel and cardboard. That bond was everything. So when the hospital called on that stormy night in 2022 and said Malik's fever had spiked dangerously high, the pneumonia spreading faster than the doctors could control, Jamal didn't hesitate. He abandoned his last 3 deliveries, turned the van toward Woodridge Medical Center, and pressed the gas harder than he ever had on that quiet stretch of road. Denise had stayed by Malik's bedside all day, her phone clutched in one hand, wiping sweat from the boy's forehead with the other. She kept texting Jamal updates, his oxygen levels dipping, the pediatric ICU team called in, prayers whispered between beeps of machines. Jamal could picture her there, the fluorescent lights, making her skin look ashen, the antiseptic smell burning her nose, the way her shoulders shook when she tried not to cry in front of the nurses. He had promised her he would be there soon. He had promised Malik the same thing the night before when the boy asked, voice small and raspy, "Daddy, you gonna stay with me tomorrow?" Jamal had kissed his fever, hot forehead, and said yes, of course, always. Back in Woodridge, the community knew Jamal as the reliable guy who waved at everyone, who volunteered at the VFW hall on weekends, who never raised his voice even when customers were rude about late packages. Neighbors described him later as the kind of man who fixes your fence without being asked, and the one who always had time to listen if you were having a bad day. But none of that mattered when 5 officers surrounded his van in the rain. To them, in that split second of decision-making, he matched a description that had gone out over the radio 20 minutes earlier: black male, approximately 50 to 60, driving a commercial-style van, possibly involved in a smash and grab at a pharmacy 2 miles away. The description was thin, almost laughably vague, but stereotypes did the rest of the work. No one asked for ID first. No one listened to the frantic father begging to reach his dying child. The Bodycam footage from that night, later released during the civil suit, shows the officers' faces in profile as they confer after cuffing him. One of them mutters, "Dispatch said the suspect was driving something like this." Another replies, "Yeah, and look at him. Fits the bill." There is a pause, the rain drumming on their hats, before the lead officer says, "Let's search the van, see if we find anything." Packages hit the wet pavement. Children's toys, vitamins, a box of diapers, scattering like evidence of a life interrupted. Jamal watched from the back seat of the cruiser, wrists throbbing, chest tight with panic. Every second felt like a theft from the time Malik had left. Inside his head, the memories collided. Flashbacks to sandstorms in Baghdad, where he kept his squad fed and fueled under fire. The day he came home and held newborn Malik for the first time, promising silently that this boy would never know the fear he had known. The evenings Denise would rub menthol on his scared shoulder and tell him he was still her hero. All of it reduced in minutes to a soaked, handcuffed man staring at rain-streaked glass while strangers rifled through his livelihood. Then came the first crack in the officer's certainty. One of them pulled Jamal's military ID and veteran's plate registration from the glove compartment. The Bodycam captures the moment the flashlight beam lands on the purple heart emblem. There is a long silence. "He's a vet," the officer says quietly. Another voice, hesitant now, "Dispatch, can you run that name again?" "Jamal Thompson." The radio crackles back almost immediately. Negative on the suspect description match. Pharmacy footage shows a much younger man, lighter build, different vehicle entirely. Wrong place, wrong face, wrong everything. The realization hit the group like cold water. Yet instead of immediate release, protocol took over. They had to verify everything. Jamal sat in the cruiser for another 47 minutes. 47 agonizing minutes. While calls were made, supervisors consulted, and his pleas to let him go to the hospital were met with variations of, "Just sit tight, we're sorting it out." His phone, confiscated during the pat down, buzzed repeatedly on the front seat with Denise's texts. "Where are you? They're putting him on a ventilator. Jamal, please hurry." By the time they finally uncuffed him, read him a half-hearted apology, and handed back his keys, Malik had already been moved to critical condition. Jamal drove the remaining 6 miles to the hospital with tears blurring the road, arriving just as the doctors were preparing to intubate his son. He burst through the doors soaked, disheveled, wrist still raw and bruised, and collapsed beside Denise. She didn't ask what happened. She just held him while they both watched the machines breathe for their boy. The videos would surface months later, igniting outrage across Woodridge and beyond. But in that hospital room, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the tiny chest rising and falling under the ventilator, the question hanging in the air: would any amount of justice ever repair what had been broken that night? Have you ever felt like the system looked at you, or someone you love, and saw only a stereotype instead of a human being? Drop justice in the comments if you think those officers should have faced more than just a slap on the wrist. Let me know what city you're watching from. What drove those 5 officers to treat a desperate father like a hardened criminal on a rainy Illinois night in 2022 was no accident. It was the same toxic mix of fear, bias, and departmental pressure that had poisoned too many traffic stops in Woodridge and towns just like it. The department had been on edge for weeks after a string of smash and grab robberies at local pharmacies, each one involving a black male suspect driving a van or truck. Briefings hammered home the vague descriptions, and the unspoken message was clear: better to overreact than be caught sleeping on the job. The lead officer that night, a 20-year veteran himself named Sergeant Harlan Reed, later admitted in deposition that the moment he saw Jamal's face through the rain-streaked window, his brain filled in every blank with the worst-case scenario. It wasn't personal, he claimed. It was protocol. But for Jamal Thompson, sitting in the back of that cruiser with wrists burning and heart shattering, protocol felt like a loaded gun pointed straight at everything he had fought his whole life to build. Jamal's mind raced back to the deserts of Iraq as the rain drummed on the roof of the squad car. He remembered the checkpoint outside Baghdad in 2004, when a young lieutenant had ordered his convoy pulled over for no reason other than, "You boys look suspicious." The same cold metal cuffs, the same flashlights in the eyes, the same feeling of being reduced to a stereotype even while wearing the uniform of the country he was bleeding for. He had kept his mouth shut then, swallowing the rage because a black soldier complaining could end a career. 20 years later, the uniform was gone, but the feeling remained. Only now it wasn't sand in his mouth. It was the metallic taste of humiliation mixed with the antiseptic scent still clinging to his clothes from the hospital parking lot he never reached. Every beep of Malik's monitors echoed in his head, every prayer Denise whispered on the phone replayed like a broken record. How many times had he told his son that the system worked if you just stayed honest and worked hard? How many times had he lied to protect the boy from the truth he was now living? The trigger that night wasn't just the broken taillight or the speed. It was the perfect storm of a tired, middle-aged black man in a delivery van late at night. The exact image that had been drilled into those officers during roll call. Jamal could hear them outside the cruiser, voices low but body cams still rolling, arguing about matching the description, while one of them ran his plates for the third time. Inside Jamal's chest, something ancient and familiar cracked open. He thought of his own father, a steelworker in Chicago who died at 50, too, after a lifetime of being called boy on the job site. He thought of Malik's small hand gripping his during their last bedtime story, asking why the police on TV always seemed to stop people who looked like them. Jamal had answered with hope back then, "Not always, son. Not if we prove them wrong." Now those words tasted like ash. The fear for his boy twisted into something sharper, pure, burning anger at a system that had taken his service, his dignity, and now threatened to take his son's life while he sat helpless in the back seat of a patrol car. But the real turning point came in the 47th minute of waiting. One of the younger officers, a rookie whose body cam caught the hesitation in his voice, finally walked over and slid Jamal's military ID through the cracked window. "Sir, we ran the name. You're clear." "Wrong guy." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they landed like a slap. Jamal stared at the card, the purple heart emblem catching the flashlight beam, and felt the weight of every promise he had broken to his family that night. He had always believed that his service would shield him, that the country he defended would at least see him as a man when it counted. In that moment, the illusion shattered. The cuffs came off, but the damage was already carved deep into his soul. He rubbed his raw wrists, the skin split and bleeding slightly from the struggle he never started, and whispered to himself the same words he had muttered in Baghdad when a roadside bomb nearly ended him. Not today. Not like this. What none of the officers realized, what even Jamal didn't fully understand until weeks later, was that the so-called or robbery suspect description had been racially coded from the very first radio call. The actual perpetrator was a white teenager in a stolen panel van, but the initial witness had only said black male, because that was the quickest way to get attention. The department had run with it, amplifying the bias until 5 grown men saw a father racing to his sick child and decided he must be the threat. That single miscommunication, born of the same old stereotypes, had nearly cost Malik his life and cost Jamal the last scraps of faith he had left in the badge. As Jamal finally pulled away from the scene, tires spinning on the wet pavement, his hands shook so badly he could barely grip the wheel. The hospital lights appeared in the distance like a beacon, but something darker had taken root inside him. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a pattern, one he could no longer ignore or forgive. and as he walked into that ICU room to find his son fighting for every breath, Jamal made a silent vow that would change everything. He would make sure the world saw those body cam videos. He would make sure no other veteran father ever had to beg the way he had begged. But what he didn't know yet was how deep the department's resistance would run, or how far they would go to bury the truth before it ever reached a courtroom. The real fight was only just beginning, and the next revelation would hit harder than any handcuff. With that vow burning like fire in his chest as he sat beside Malik's ventilator in the ICU, Jamal's mind kept dragging him back to every single second of those rain-soaked minutes, the 5 body cams capturing the escalation in brutal, synchronized detail that would later shock the entire department. The footage from all 5 officers played in perfect syncs during the internal review, showing the group working as one unit, no single cop ever alone in frame, their flashlights cutting through the downpour like accusatory fingers. Sergeant Harlan Reed's camera led the charge, but every angle revealed the same coordinated aggression. Hands on holsters, shoulders squared, 5 grown men turning a father's desperate drive into a scene straight out of a nightmare. The escalation hit its first terrible peak the instant Jamal's boots touched the wet pavement. 2 officers from the group grabbed him under the arms, yanking him forward so hard his knees buckled on the slick asphalt. The cold rain slammed into his face, mixing with the hot sting of tears he refused to let fall. You can see it clearly on the body cams, all 5 officers visible as they surrounded him against the side of the van, the metal cold and unforgiving against his chest. "Stay still," one barked, his voice sharp as the handcuffs clicked into place behind Jamal's back, tighter than necessary, the steel biting deep into his wrists until he felt the skin split. The pain shot up his arms like fire, but the real agony was the sound of his own voice cracking as he pleaded again. "Officer, please, my son is 8 years old. He's in the hospital right now fighting for his life. Check my phone, the texts are right there. I'm Jamal Thompson, Army veteran. I'm not running from anything." But the group didn't pause. The 3rd and 4th officers began ripping open the rear doors of the van while the 5th kept a flashlight pinned on Jamal's face, blinding him. Packages flew out onto the road, toys for other people's children, medicine, diapers, hitting the puddles with wet thuds that echoed like small explosions in Jamal's ears. The smell of wet cardboard and diesel fuel filled the air, choking him as the rain soaked through his delivery jacket and ran down his neck in icy streams. Inside his head, the thoughts screamed, "This can't be happening. I served this country. I held my dying comrades in the sand and never once begged like this. Now I'm begging for my boy, and they're treating me like I'm the enemy." The humiliation burned hotter than the pain in his wrists. Sergeant Reed's body cam caught the next escalation perfectly. The moment one of the officers found Jamal's military ID in the glove box, and the group froze for half a second. "Purple Heart," the man read aloud, his voice suddenly quieter. But instead of backing off, the escalation only grew. Reed barked an order, "Search everything again. Make sure there's no contraband. We're not letting him go until dispatch confirms." The other 4 officers moved faster, tearing through the remaining boxes, their boots splashing in the puddles, flashlights sweeping every corner while Jamal stood pinned, shoulders screaming from the awkward angle of the cuffs. The rain pounded harder now, thunder rolling in the distance like the universe itself was angry. Jamal's legs shook. He could smell the wet leather of the officers' belts, hear the crackle of their radios, feel the collective weight of 5 bodies closing in. "My wife is alone with him," he gasped, voice breaking completely. "The machines are breathing for my son right now. Please, just let me go to them." One of the younger officers hesitated. His body cam showed the uncertainty in his eyes, but Reed shut it down instantly. "Protocol," he snapped. "We've got a description to clear." The group closed ranks again, all 5 visible in every frame, hands still on Jamal as they ran his name for the 3rd time. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. Jamal's internal world collapsed, flashes of Malik's tiny chest rising and falling, Denise's tear-streaked face, the promise he had made that morning to be home for dinner. All of it stolen by 5 men who saw only skin color and a van. The anger mixed with terror until he could barely breathe, the cuffs cutting deeper with every involuntary twitch. Then came the twist none of them expected in real time. Dispatch finally crackled through on all 5 body cams at once. Negative match. Suspect is white, different vehicle. The words hung in the rainy air. For a split second the group stood silent, the rain the only sound. Reed's shoulders dropped slightly on his own camera. But even then, the escalation didn't stop immediately. They still made Jamal stand there another 10 minutes while they photographed every package, logged the incident, and argued in low voices about whether to write him up for the broken taillight anyway. The humiliation reached its absolute peak right there. A decorated veteran, a loving father, reduced to a soaking, bleeding, handcuffed prop while 5 officers covered their mistake with paperwork. By the time the cuffs finally came off and they handed him back his keys with a muttered, "Sorry for the inconvenience," Jamal's entire body was trembling with rage and relief and something far darker. He drove away without another word, the taste of blood in his mouth where he had bitten his lip to keep from screaming. Those bodycam videos would later prove every second of the needless escalation, but in that moment all Jamal could think about was reaching the hospital before it was too late. What he didn't know yet was how those same recordings would explode into a full-blown scandal that would force the department to confront its own rot, and how the fight he had just vowed to start would test every ounce of strength he had left. If you've ever been pulled over and felt like the officers saw your skin before they saw you as a father or a veteran, type justice in the comments right now. Have you experienced something like this in your own town? Let me know below. I read every single comment. The moment Jamal Thompson pushed through the sliding doors of Woodridge Medical Center that stormy night in 2022, the sterile smell of antiseptic and fear hit him like a second slap after the handcuffs. His wrists were still raw and swollen, blood dried in thin lines where the steel had cut deepest, but none of that mattered when he saw Denise's face in the ICU waiting area. She looked up from the plastic chair, eyes red and swollen, and for a split second the relief of seeing him crashed into the terror still etched on her features. He collapsed into her arms, the soaked delivery jacket dripping rainwater onto the linoleum floor, and whispered the only words that could come out, "I'm here. I'm so sorry I'm late." The machines behind the glass wall beeped steadily, keeping their 8-year-old son Malik alive, but the chaos inside Jamal's chest felt louder than any alarm. Doctors had already intubated the boy. Tubes ran into his small chest, monitors flashing numbers that meant nothing to a father who had just been treated like a criminal for trying to reach him. Jamal stood at the window, palms pressed against the cold glass, watching Malik's tiny frame rise and fall with each forced breath. The image burned into his mind forever. The same boy who had begged him to stay home that morning, now fighting alone, because 5 officers decided his skin and his van made him dangerous. Inside Jamal's head the questions, screamed I, how many other black fathers had been delayed like this? How many veterans had begged for mercy only to be told, protocol first? The anger from the roadside mixed with guilt that threatened to drown him. If I had left earlier, if I hadn't been pulled over, if the system actually saw me as the man I am. Denise held his hand so tight her nails left marks. Her voice breaking as she described the last hour, Malik's oxygen crashing, nurses rushing, the doctor pulling her aside to warn that another 30 minutes might have been too late. She didn't ask what happened to him yet. She just kept repeating, "You made it." That's all that matters right now. But Jamal could see the new lines of exhaustion on her face, the way her shoulders carried the weight of another night wondering if the world would ever let their family breathe. Their modest house in Woodridge, the one they had scraped together after his army retirement and the factory closure, suddenly felt fragile. Bills for the hospital would pile up. His delivery job might fire him for abandoning the rote. And the trauma, that invisible scar, was already spreading through all 3 of them like poison. Neighbors started calling within the hour. Word traveled fast in their tight, knit community of veterans and working families. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street texted Denise, saw the police lights on Route 53. Everything okay? Jamal's phone, still damp from the rain, buzzed with messages from his VFW buddy's brother. You good? Need anything? But beneath the concern lay the unspoken fear every black man in Woodridge knew too well. Another story of a stop gone wrong. Another family torn apart by the same system they had all sworn to serve. Jamal stared at the messages, his raw wrists throbbing with every tap. and felt the dignity he had spent 58 years building crack even further. He had taught Malik to respect the badge. Now he wondered if he could ever look his son in the eye again without shame. The immediate fallout hit like aftershocks. Jamal couldn't sleep that first night in the hospital recliner, the smell of disinfectant mixing with the memory of wet asphalt and flashlight beams. Every time a nurse walked by, he flinched, expecting another command, another set of hands grabbing him. Denise finally convinced him to tell her everything at 3 a.m., and the words poured out between sobs he hadn't allowed himself on the roadside. "They treated me like I was nobody," he whispered. "Like my Purple Heart meant nothing. Like our son's life meant nothing." Denise cried with him, but there was steel in her voice when she said, "We're not letting this slide, Jamal." Not this time. The decision was made right there in the dim ICU light. They would file a complaint, demand the Bodycam footage, force the department to answer for every second of that needless escalation. By morning, the hospital released a cautious update. Malik was stable but still critical. Jamal stepped outside for air, the same rain now lighter, and felt the weight of every stare from people in the parking lot who had seen the news tickers starting to run. Local stations were already picking up the story. Veteran father detained en route to sick child. And the first shaky cell, phone videos from neighbors were circulating online. Jamal's face wasn't shown yet, but the van and the 5 officers were unmistakable. The chaos was spreading beyond their family now, touching coworkers who whispered in the break room and church members who offered prayers laced with quiet anger. How long would the department hide behind ongoing review? How many more fathers would be pulled from their children before someone finally admitted the bias was baked into the badge? But the real bomb dropped 2 days later when Jamal received the first official letter from the Woodridge Police Department. A formal apology and a promise of internal investigation. It felt like salt in the wounds still healing on his wrists. He crumpled the paper in his fist while standing at Malik's bedside, the boy's eyes finally fluttering open for the first time. "Daddy, you came," Malik whispered through the tubes, voice weak but full of trust that nearly broke Jamal all over again. In that moment, the father made another silent vow, this time not just to his family, but to every veteran and every black man watching from their living rooms. The Bodycam videos would see the light of day. The truth would come out. Yet what Jamal didn't realize as he held his son's small hand was that the department had already begun circling the wagons, deleting minor logs and pressuring the younger officers to stay quiet. The investigation that was supposed to bring answers was about to uncover something far darker than a single mistaken stop, and the revelations would shake the entire town to its core. The investigation into Jamal Thompson's nightmare traffic stop in Woodridge, Illinois, back in 2022 began with a single formal complaint filed from his hospital bedside while Malik still fought to breathe on his own. Jamal and Denise sat side by side in the dim ICU light, wrists still bandaged, and dictated every humiliating detail to their attorney, Reginald Hayes, a no-nonsense civil rights lawyer who had seen too many cases like this. What started as an internal affairs review quickly turned explosive when the department was forced to release all 5 Bodycam videos under mounting public pressure. The footage hit local news within days, and the synchronized recordings from every officer told a story far uglier than any vague apology letter ever could. Jamal watched the videos for the first time in his living room 2 weeks later, the same rain-soaked night replaying in crystal clear 4K on his old television. The smell of Denise's coffee mixed with the antiseptic scent still clinging to his clothes from the hospital, and his stomach twisted as he saw himself, a decorated Army veteran, a devoted father, slammed against the van by 5 officers working in perfect, coordinated lockstep. Every angle showed the group dynamic, flashlights blinding him, cuffs biting deep, packages scattered like discarded dignity. Inside his head, the rage roared louder than the thunder on the recording. "I served this country. I bled for it. And this is what they do to me when my son needs me most." The Purple Heart on his ID flashed under their lights, yet they kept him pinned another 47 minutes. The betrayal cut deeper than any shrapnel wound from Iraq. But the first major twist came when Internal Affairs dug deeper and uncovered Sergeant Harlan Reed's personnel file. Hidden complaints from 3 previous stops, all involving black drivers in delivery vehicles, had been quietly buried with Insufficient evidence, labels. One rookie officer whose body cam had captured his hesitation that night finally broke rank in a closed-door interview. He admitted under oath that Reed had muttered over the radio. Another one fitting the description, let's not take chances, even before Jamal stepped out of the van. The deleted radio log they later recovered proved the department had tried to scrub that transmission to protect their sergeant. The revelation hit the community like a bomb. Veterans at the VFW hall stopped wearing their uniforms to town meetings. Neighbors who once trusted the badge now stood outside the station with signs reading, "Bodycams don't lie." But the system does. Denise watched the footage beside Jamal, her hand squeezing his bandaged wrist until fresh tears fell. She whispered the fear every wife of a black veteran carried. They could have killed you, Jamal, over a broken taillight and a stereotype. Their son Malik, now home and gaining strength every day, asked innocent questions from the couch. "Daddy, why did the police hurt you when you were trying to help me?" And each word carved fresh guilt into Jamal's soul. He had always taught the boy that hard work and service brought respect. Now he lay awake at night smelling wet asphalt and hearing those cuffs click, wondering how to explain that the same system he defended overseas had turned on him at home. The trauma spread through the family like cracks in dry earth. Jamal flinched at every siren, Denise double-checked the locks, and little Malik drew pictures of police cars with sad faces. The second devastating twist dropped when the full unedited files reached the civil rights attorney. Buried metadata showed the department had altered timestamps on 2 body cams to make the delay look shorter. And worse, an internal memo from the chief himself, dated weeks before the stop, instructed officers to heighten awareness on commercial vans in minority, heavy routes. The bias wasn't a mistake. It was policy. Jamal stood in Attorney Haya's office, the printed memo shaking in his hands, and felt the last thread of faith in the badge snap completely. This wasn't about one rainy night anymore. This was about every veteran father who had ever been reduced to a threat because of the color of his skin. The anger that had simmered since the roadside now burned with purpose. He looked at Hayes and said quietly, "We take this all the way. No settlement. No quiet payout. The world needs to see what they almost cost my son." Public outrage exploded across Woodridge and beyond. Cell phone videos of the stop mixed with the official body cams went viral. Community leaders demanded the chief's resignation. Even some officers quietly supported Jamal in anonymous letters admitting the culture had poisoned too many good men. Jamal's delivery company gave him paid leave, but the real healing came in small moments. Malik climbing into his lap at night and saying, "You're still my hero, Daddy." Yet beneath the growing hope lay the fear that the system would close ranks again, bury the evidence deeper, and leave another family broken. The lawsuit was filed, depositions scheduled, and the department finally forced into open court. But the biggest revelation was still coming, one that would expose not just 5 officers, but the entire chain of command that had protected them for years. Just when Jamal thought the truth was finally out, a whistleblower inside the department handed over a secret folder that changed everything. The path to justice was about to get bloodier, and the final verdict would either restore his faith or shatter it forever. If those bodycam videos made your blood boil the way they did for Jamal's family, type justice in the comments right now. Have you or someone you love ever been on the wrong end of a mistaken identity? Stop. Drop your city below and tell me. I read every comment from brothers watching this. The whistleblower inside the Woodridge Police Department handed over that secret folder in the spring of 2023, and what it contained shattered any remaining illusions Jamal Thompson still held about the system that had once earned his loyalty. Pages upon pages of internal memos proved that Sergeant Harlan Reed had been flagged for biased stops 3 times before that rainy night, yet each complaint had been quietly buried by the chief himself with the handwritten note, "No further action needed." The folder also held emails showing the entire command staff had encouraged heightened awareness on black drivers in commercial vans, turning vague robbery descriptions into a license to harass. Jamal sat in his attorney's office, the papers trembling in his bandaged hands, the faint scent of hospital antiseptic still haunting him months later, and whispered, "They didn't just make a mistake. They built the trap." The revelation turned the civil lawsuit from a single incident into a full indictment of the department's culture, and by the summer of 2023, the case was headed to federal court with bodycam footage playing on every local news station. The trial in early 2024 was raw and unrelenting. Jamal took the stand in his old army dress uniform, wrists still bearing faint scars from those two tight cuffs, and described every humiliating second while the 5 officers sat stone, faced in the gallery. The synchronized body cams rolled again for the jury, all 5 officers visible in every frame, working together to pin down a desperate father racing to his dying child. Denise held Malik's hand in the front row, the boy now fully recovered and wearing the purple heart pin his father had given him. When Jamal broke down describing the moment he finally reached the ICU, the courtroom fell silent except for the sound of sniffles and the soft click of the judge's pen. The defense tried to call it protocol under pressure, but the whistleblower's testimony and the deleted logs buried them. Jurors later said the purple heart flashing under those flashlights was the moment they knew the system had failed one of its own. Justice, when it finally came in the fall of 2024, was partial at best, the kind that leaves a bitter taste even as it brings some relief. The case was closed by November 2024, just before the holidays. Sergeant Reed received a written reprimand and was demoted to desk duty. The other 4 officers got mandatory retraining on implicit bias and de-escalation, with 2 of them transferred to different shifts. The department paid a modest settlement that covered Malik's remaining medical bills and Jamal's lost wages, but no one was fired, no chief resigned, and the internal memo policy was quietly rewritten without public admission of guilt. Jamal stood on the courthouse steps that crisp November morning, Denise and Malik beside him, the autumn leaves crunching under their shoes like the sound of old promises breaking. He looked into the cameras and said quietly, "They called it justice. I call it the bare minimum after they almost took my son from me." The trauma didn't vanish with the verdict. Jamal still flinched at sirens, still woke up smelling wet asphalt and hearing those cuffs click. Yet something stronger had grown in its place, a quiet fire that pushed him to speak at VFW halls and community centers, telling every veteran father, "Don't let them reduce you to a stereotype. Fight back with the truth." Malik thrived after that year of nightmares. He started playing basketball again, his laughter filling the driveway where Jamal once coached him under summer skies. Denise went back to work with a new strength in her eyes, and the 3 of them rebuilt their little house in Woodridge, one honest conversation at a time. But the scar remained, a reminder that, for too many Black veterans, the system that asked them to bleed overseas still saw them as threats at home. Jamal never returned to delivery driving. Instead, he started a small nonprofit with other affected families, helping veterans document stops and demand bodycam transparency. The town changed in small ways too. More officers wore bodycams without hesitation, and community forums now included veteran voices. Still, Jamal knew the fight wasn't over. Partial justice had been served, but real change that would take generations of men like him refusing to stay silent. As he tucked Malik into bed on the first anniversary of that stormy night, the boy looked up and said, "Daddy, you won." Jamal smiled through the lump in his throat, kissed his forehead, and answered, "We're still winning, son." Every day, we breathe free. The bodycam videos that once broke his heart now served as proof that one man's pain could force a department to look in the mirror. Yet the question lingered in every veteran's mind across Woodridge and beyond: how many more fathers would have to beg before the system finally saw them as human? If you believe Jamal deserved more than a slap on the wrist for the officers and real systemic change instead of just retraining, type justice in the comments right now. Have you or a veteran in your family faced this kind of injustice? Drop your city below. I read every single comment from brothers who know the struggle. And if this story of resilience, family, and the fight against a broken system touched your heart the way it touched mine, smash that subscribe button right now, like this video, and share it with every veteran and father you know. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next Midnight Dispatch story. Because these voices deserve to be heard. Stay strong out there.